Hi everyone, it's Dr. Felicia, and I will today I'm going to be talking about boundaries and spiritual abuse. And so I'll wait for some more people to join before we get into the discussion. And when I talk to today's talk, I'm going to be examining the not only the importance of having boundaries, but also how you can actually use it as a way to prevent spiritual abuse, or recover from it. A lot of, everyone who's watching may be in different stages in their spiritual abuse recovery journey. And so, regardless of where you are, boundaries are always a real good tool to have in your recovery tool belt or toolbox. So what I can do is one thing I'll do is I'll start out by talking about what spiritual abuse is, and what many of you are probably familiar with my definition of spiritual abuse, and people are going to define spiritual abuse in different ways. But for me, I define spiritual abuse to occur when somebody is using spirituality to cause harm, to control, to manipulate. And of course, it's going to look different ways based on the person, based on the environment, different things like that. So it's important that as you are navigating through spiritual abuse recovery, you want to make sure that you are aware of not only the type of, what happened with the spiritual abuse, but also how it's affected you. Oh, thank you. Someone liked, and I see one liked the video already, which is great. And I see a couple of you here in the room. So if you can always send a message or put something in the chat letting me know that you're here, and what questions you have. I will be talking some about boundaries and spiritual abuse, but there are also other things that I will talk about on the on this video, and also will answer any questions or just comments and things like that you might have. I know that boundaries can be a touchy topic for some people, especially since the term can often be misused, and boundaries themselves can be misapplied. So people might, I've heard of stories of how abusive people themselves will justify their abuse under the guise of boundaries. So just wait for and if you are here and you want to introduce yourself, if this is the first time, let me know that you're here. And it'd be great to see, maybe some of you are returning, but either way, let me know in the chat. So what I'll do is I will first start out by explaining the purpose of healthy boundaries. When we think about boundaries, well, why do we have boundaries? Boundaries are for our protection and for our safety. So if you really want to make sure that you don't use boundaries as a way of controlling other people. And so sometimes people have this misconception that, well, if I set this boundary, then that means I won't, undergo any harm. Nobody will harm me, things like that. And that's not necessarily how boundaries work, because at the end of the day, you can't control somebody else's behavior. So it's really important that as you are navigating boundaries and figuring out what works well for you, that you have to understand that the ultimate goal is to have agency around your actions, not what somebody else does. So I see a few more people here. You're not late. You're just on time. Nice to see you, blessed one. And I see Sharita here. Hello, absolutely. Yeah. So again, for those of you who are new, we are talking about boundaries and how they relate to spiritual abuse. And one thing that I really like about understanding how our boundaries work is that regardless of, let's say you're in a situation where you're still in a spiritually abusive environment and you are navigating your way out. Boundaries are a great way to help you focus on what's important and help you with those next steps. So that is, so I'll also put the question here in, I'll put a question here in the chat, or just let me, just give me a second here. So again, when we think about boundaries, it's not for anybody else, not to control anybody else's behaviors, to control, just to control yourself, I guess. And another thing I want to clarify about that is that just because you have boundaries doesn't necessarily mean you won't get hurt. It just means that you are deciding how you're going to interact with that environment. If you're still in there, hopefully how you will get yourself out of that environment, and then also how you can recover and prevent that from happening as well. So part of one reason why I think it's difficult for people to set boundaries, especially when it comes to spiritually abusive environments and people, is because of some of the lies that people have heard and believed about boundaries, right? And it may not necessarily be about boundaries specifically, but when you are in an environment that really prioritizes the needs of a leader above the needs of everybody else, then you're going to have a difficult time standing up for yourself. So sometimes people feel, really, they might feel ashamed, they might feel bad because they have difficulty setting boundaries. But you have to remember that the place that you're coming from discourages that type of behavior. What types of skills do boundaries require? They require you to, number one, think independently. Number two, to value yourself and to assert yourself. And in many, abusive people in abusive environments, they see that type of behavior as selfish. And so they will tell you, you're being selfish, or you are, you are in sin, or whatever it is, whatever accusations they want to hurl at you. And so that's why it can be really difficult for people when they are navigating boundaries. And sometimes people don't know, well, how does that boundary look? Do I need to tell people that I'm setting a boundary? Things like that. So I'd like to see from you all in the live right now, do you have any questions about how to set boundaries or boundaries in spiritual abuse? That's true. They don't want you to have boundaries. Yeah, some of you have told, stories in the live about how people have expected you to give your time, your energy, your resources, whatever things that you have, they feel like you should just give that to them. So I know that someone had told a story about how they were told that their home and their income belonged to the church. And so people could stay in their home whenever they wanted. And it was just, it's awful. But when people push back against these things, then they're told that they're being selfish. Right. And so that's one way to think about it. Before you even start out wanting to set boundaries, think about the challenges that you have and think about the mindset and the rules of that environment that make it bad for people to set boundaries. Right. So when you think about the boundaries that you want to set in a spiritually abusive environment, the first thing you want to understand are, what are your non-negotiables? And we've talked about this before. But basically, as you think about what's important to you, what are things that you feel that you are not willing to, I guess, share or let other people have access to, right? Someone says, I've walked away. I'll never go back to a physical church. Wow. Yeah, that's, your experience is not uncommon. A lot of people are, I've heard a lot of people say similar things, that they either won't go back to a physical church, or they'll either attend online, or they just won't go at all, or they just find different ways to navigate that. So, it's important to understand, what are your non-negotiables. For some people, it could be their time, right? And so you might set a boundary around how much time you are willing to give to that institution. It could be something like, well, I'm going to go once a week. And if they want anything besides once a week, I'm not doing it, right? Before I go on about boundaries, too, I want to, regardless of whether you think you are in a spiritually abusive environment or not, it's important to have boundaries. And the reason is when you set a boundary, you want to be observant about how the person that's on the other side of that boundary, how they react. Do they respect that boundary, or do they not respect it, right? And if somebody doesn't respect that, a lot of spiritually abusive people and environments, they don't respect the boundaries of others. And that is a clue to you that that's not a healthy place to be in. So I'd like to ask you, and in the comment section, what does it look like when a boundary is not respected? So there are several examples I can think of, but I'd like to ask you all in the audience first and see, what does that look like? You know, if you set a boundary and it's being ignored or it's not being respected, what do you notice? So I'll start it off. Something that I have seen is, let's say someone says, I don't want to do this, or I'll think about it. A way of not respecting that is repeated questions. So, for instance, let's say you are part of this group and they ask you, can they borrow something of yours? Maybe they want to borrow your truck to help move some equipment, and you don't feel comfortable with it. So you say, you know what, let me get back to you in a week about that. I'll let you know by next week. And between the time you say, I'm going to get back to you, you get a bunch of phone calls, or you get repeated texts saying, hey, we really need this truck, and this family is really down on their luck, and we really could use this truck, and right now we don't have the finances to afford X, Y, and Z. That's an example of not respecting your boundaries, right? Because if you said you're going to give them a week, then they need to give you that week. Okay, I see a comment here. When you let a person know they're crossing a line, they do it more. Yeah. God the Son, Jesus Christ saves says, hi, how are you? I think this is probably the first time I've seen you here. If this is your first time here, let me know. And that's a great example. When you let a person know they're crossing a line, they do it more. And so when someone crosses a line and you tell them you don't like something and they do it more, not only is that a violation of your boundary, it's basically telling you that, your likes and preferences aren't important. A variation of that is asking why, you don't want to do this or want to share something. So for instance, people have talked about how they're private about something. Somebody might ask them a question that they find intrusive. And so they just say, oh, that's private, I'm not going to answer that. And say, well, why won't you answer that? What's the big deal? Right. And so that is an example of what Blessed One said. When you don't want to share information and they ask you, well, why won't you share it? What's the big deal? That's a violation of a boundary. Okay. Hey, so Sharita says, I recently severed friendship with my best friend who is a leader in the church. She keeps trying to reach me. I'm ignoring it. I'm exhausted. Yeah. When people don't respect your boundaries, they want to wear you down, right? So I can, think about a time where you gave in to somebody because they wouldn't stop asking about something, right? Maybe, they asked whatever it is they asked you. You gave in because you were tired of all the nagging questions, right? So that is a boundary violation. Even, people rarely will come out and say, I don't respect your boundaries. They'll just ask you something over and over and over again. If you say, can, like, for instance, the truck example I gave, the person comes back and says, you know what, I don't want to lend out my truck. Oh, well, can we just borrow it for an hour? Or can you ride with us, right? They'll ask a variation of that just to get on your nerves and wear you down eventually. Um, they also guilt you more when you set a boundary, try to make you feel bad. Yes, that is very true. And I have a video about this that we really need as part of your recovery from spiritual abuse. I want you to learn how to become immune to guilt, because guilt is just part of the package. A lot of us who have survived spiritual abuse have other types of abuse or toxic relationships that are along for the ride. And guilt is the weapon of choice for manipulative people. And so part of what, my work part of the work I do with my individual clients in terms of recovering from this spiritual abuse is learning how to navigate those feelings of guilt, because you're not always, you're going to feel guilty. That's part of the package. And so for some people, when, this, the statement here about using guilt to try to make you feel bad, that's exactly, they want you to change that boundary. They want you to make you feel like a bad person. They might say things like, it's not always about you. The world doesn't revolve around you. You're a selfish person. How many times have, we helped you out? And, things like that. Hey, Vivian, nice to see you here. I don't think I've seen you before, so welcome. This is a great conversation, Dr. Much Needed. Thank you. Yeah, so the guilt is huge. And I don't want to insinuate that if you're going to recover from spiritual abuse or defend yourself from it, that you become an unfeeling person. But we have to remember that guilt is just that, guilt. It doesn't necessarily mean that you did something wrong because you feel guilty. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything because you feel guilty either. But manipulative people know that guilt is, it's a pretty strong motivator, right? And so if they can guilt you into doing something, they will. And, think about spiritual environments, religious environments. Guilt is a big thing. I think it just comes with the territory. So that's one way that, that people show that they don't respect your boundaries, is by how they react. Correct. It's so much pressure. Yes. Yeah. That's why I, recommend to people that be careful when you go to a church or religious setting and you sign up for giving before you give anybody your email address or phone number or physical address. Just think about it, right? You don't have to give people your information, because that's one way these environments will get you. They will send you text messages all the time. People will call you that you don't know. People have shown up at people's homes. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I say that, that you think about it before you give that information. And so that's important. That's important to know. So I've talked about, how we know when people don't respect our boundaries. So what, I guess the next point I want to discuss is, like, how do we know that we're setting a good boundary, right? Like, what does that look like? Because some boundaries, I don't think they're not going to be very helpful, right? So if your boundary is, well, I'm going to make sure I don't get hurt, that's not a realistic boundary. People can say things, and that can hurt your feelings. And emotional pain is just part of the human experience. So when you go about setting boundaries, it makes sense to start with something very specific. So let's say that you are in a busy period of your life and you want to value your time. So you can have a boundary around your time in which you say, I'm doing things with this community once a week or this many hours. And if it goes outside those hours, I'm not doing it. Vivian says, test the no and see how they respond. Yes, that's something I tell people quite frequently. If it's a healthy environment, they'll just say, okay, and it'll be fine. So I always say, even for the fun of it, you can always go back and say yes later, but say no to something and see how that, see how they respond to that when you say no. So the time, again, so that I gave an example about time. That is, and that could just be one thing. So you could say, I'm willing to give this many hours to this place, or I'm only willing to give certain hours during certain times, right? Another thing about boundaries is that boundaries are more, they're best communicated through action and not telling people things, right? Sometimes people say, well, it's important to tell people, and sometimes it is. But in the case of what I told you about now with time, that might not be something you want to communicate to that environment, right? So if you say, well, I have, Sunday nights free, and so that's the only time I can do something, well, they might try to overload your schedule every Sunday night and say, well, you said you have Sunday nights free, so you should be able to help with X, Y, and Z. So when we think about boundaries, let's focus on the actions that go along with what you are protecting. We've talked about this as well, that spiritually abusive environments prey on people with financial problems. So you could decide that if something is over a certain amount of money, that you're not going to give that unless you have like a 24-hour time period to think it over. And I know a few people that do this, and I think, and it's not, they don't just do this with church or spiritual environments, they do it with other aspects of their life. So maybe it's large purchases or whatever. So your boundary might be, if it's over X amount of money, then my automatic answer will be no, and then I can always change it later. There's no harm in saying no. You can say no, and you have the right to change your mind. And I think I would say that if you have difficulty with succumbing to guilt, then part of your work would involve saying no, like that your default is going to be no for some time. And we'll, see how that goes. So you can have boundaries around your time. You can have boundaries around your finances. You can also have boundaries around what you are and not willing to talk about. And there's a video that I made on this about vulnerability, and spiritually abusive people and environments weaponize vulnerability. What I mean by that is, if you share something vulnerable, if you're being vulnerable, if you're sharing something that's private, that might be used against you. And it often is in these types of environments. There's also pressure to be vulnerable at times when it's not appropriate. So, we joked about this here on this channel about how these environments like to say, well, we're all family here. And they might say that, to precede them asking you something that is, that makes you feel uncomfortable. Oh, we're all family here. And then maybe people start oversharing, trauma dumping. I have a video on that as well, about just sharing all their traumas. And it's like, okay, your turn, and you've known these people for like 5 minutes. I see some comments here. I've had that happen. That's so true. Say no. Yeah. So I see some more people here. If you're here for the first time, welcome. Let me know if you have any questions. And then also, now that we're on the topic of vulnerability and boundaries, have any of you had your vulnerability weaponized against you? That's something that's come up as well. So I'm going to ask about that, and you can put that in the chat. Don't believe the all, use discernment. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, these absolutely, sometimes these absolute statements can be really concerning. Les one says, I hate that I used to testify. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Hey, New Biology 101. Good to see you again. I remember you from last time. So I see, I used to do that. I see some of those things in the comments. I hate that I used to testify. And don't be tough on yourself. I always want people to remember that when you think about your time in a spiritually abusive environment, the things that you did as a way of surviving that environment, right? And so it's easy to look back on things that have happened and perhaps feel shame, and that's okay too. I'm not here to judge your feelings, but it's also important to look at things from a place of compassion. So for when I know it's a little off topic, but if you find yourself struggling with regret over things that you did, you could, think about, well, what if a good friend of yours had done some of those same things while they were in that environment? You would feel compassion for them. You would help them understand, hey, like what you did was understandable. So but yes, testifying is a big one, so they might ask people, well, what's your testimony about this? And only to use that against you later. Maybe someone said that they, were sober for like 6 months. This was their 6 month of sobriety. And then, later on, the fact that they used to struggle with alcoholism is used against them. The same people might say, oh, well, I don't know, just use whatever their challenge is and throw it back in their face. So it's important. I'm not saying that people shouldn't share testimonies, but you need to read the room and look at the type of people that are around you, and do you trust them? And see, comment, that's true, but I felt stupid. Yeah, I think for all of us, we can look back at some things and think, oh, why did I do that? Or why did I trust this person? Or, things like that. So you know better now. And one thing that is really amazing about the comments that I'm seeing is that people are really using a lot of resilience. Your resilience is showing, and that's good. And seeing, okay, well, this is something I used to do, but now I'm not going to do that anymore. And even just being aware too that this could be a challenge. So vulnerability is a big one. Through testifying, it makes me not trust people anymore. Yeah, yeah, that I can definitely understand that. Something I say is that it's not enough for someone to earn your trust. They need to maintain that trust over time. And so somebody who is a healthy person, somebody who values you and respects you, will work to maintain your trust and not just take the trust that you've built for granted. So we talked about the vulnerability aspect, being pressured into sharing things that you're not ready to share, that you're not comfortable sharing. And so when people have refrained from sharing on that deep level, it's been weaponized against them. So people might say things like, oh, well, you're not part of the group, you are whatever it is. The messaging that you are doing too much to isolate yourself, or you think you're better than other people, or you're making us feel uncomfortable by not sharing, things like that. So I'm sure that some of you probably have heard some things like that before when you didn't want to share, or like I said, sharing something and then having that weaponized against you. We can have boundaries on our money, and also the things that we or choose not to share, right? And something again to remember is that when we set up these, they're not there to control other people. You really can't, as you all know, as you've talked about here, you can't control how people will respond to a boundary that you've set. That happens in my family as well. Yeah, I'm assuming you mean people, well, I guess, wanting you to feel ashamed for not sharing certain things, or being, appearing more distant. Yeah. Yeah. So that can happen. Also, when we think about guilt, another way that people will try to disrespect your boundaries are through fear. Many of you have shared how when you have left that environment or when you've talked about leaving, they will say things like you're going to, like, judgment will fall upon you, bad things will happen to you. Um, the fear of the unknown, right? It's difficult enough, I think, to make a change. Changes aren't easy for us. And so when you say, I'm going to move on or I'm going to do things differently, then that can come up. And so this fear of the unknown is something that people will use to try and scare you out of having boundaries. One of the comments on one of my other videos, somebody said that they, I think they were in the process of bringing legal charges against somebody, and they were told by the church, don't do it. And then they did anyway, and they were told, well, now the judgment is going to come upon you. See some comments here. Yes, or that you've left God. Scare tactics. Yeah. So, and that fear is the reason why the scare tactics are, in my opinion, especially egregious, is, people, no one has a perfect life, right? And so things happen, right? There are things that are great that happen, and there are things that are not great that happen. And so when somebody is in this process of, like, differentiating themselves from um, an environment that is not healthy, and they're moving on, and they're told all these bad things are going to happen, and then people, face hardships, and they start to wonder, well, oh, is that because of me? Did I do something bad? Am I getting judged or punished because of my bad behavior, right? Something else that can, another way that this can happen is by people sort of they won't blame you, they'll blame an outside source. And so, for instance, they might say something like, well, it's the devil that's bringing division and whatnot. So you deciding that you're going to go somewhere else, now it's the devil's fault, right? I remember I was watching this show like years ago. The singer Toni Braxton was talking about how, I think she got like a solo deal or something, and don't quote me on it because this was years ago, but she talked about how she had a solo deal, and when she got that solo deal, through, like, they were wanting to all sing together, but her and her sisters, but I think it was maybe Babyface or someone said, okay, no, it's just you, Toni. And so her, people were really upset with her and the family, and they were saying, oh, that this is, division, the enemy's bringing division and tearing us apart. So instead of being happy for her, and I can understand, too, that they would be hurt, but when you blame stuff on the devil like that, that takes it to a different level, in my opinion. And I just felt, from listening to her, you could tell that she was really hurt by it. Oh, okay. I guess I do remember the story correctly, because I see a comment. Yes, her mother told her that. Yeah, that the devil is, bringing division. And so think about how guilty she must have felt. A lot of you talked about how you have difficulty celebrating your accomplishments and relishing in good times because the spiritually abusive environment has told you that you are a bad person or you don't deserve it or whatever, or the devil's behind it, right? And so in this case, this is what she felt. And she talked about how she just felt a lot of guilt, when she was succeeding. And so that it spoils things for people, right? And think about, and that's another way too, where people can, institutions can abuse people. Because think about it, they're like, oh, well, the devil's behind this or whatever. People feel guilty, and then people may give out of guilt. They might feel an unnecessary obligation to support other people to show that they're not selfish. Okay, I see a statement here. Toni said she felt guilty. She said sometimes she still doesn't. She was tired of it. Yeah, and who can blame her, right? It's really unfortunate, and this is not only a symptom of spiritually abusive institutions. You also see this a lot in toxic families, and unhealthy, dysfunctional families. So there may be that maybe there's one person who differentiates themselves from everybody. They succeed, they're doing well. Well, they're told you've abandoned us, you're selfish. And so in order to prove that they're not selfish, they enable the leeches in that family system, right? Someone says, yeah, family is the worst setting for laying on the guilt. Oh, yeah, yeah, they really are. And it's unfortunate to see people that, sometimes have so much potential and so much going for them, feeling like they don't deserve that. And so when you have something good and you feel like you don't deserve it, you're going to, I think that's a big um, factor with self sabotage, being told that you don't deserve this. And so you're not going to work hard to maintain the good things that you had because you feel like you don't deserve them in the first place. Unhealthy families send that message a lot, and spiritually abusive uh, institutions also will say that to people. I'd like to hear from you all. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever gotten similar messaging from from your spiritually abusive environment? Um, so I'm looking here at the comments about that. Let's see. Yes, it's happening to me right now. I'm being guilted for wanting to ask my birth mom questions. Oh, that's tough. That's tough. Yeah, that's another thing too with spiritually abusive environments, is that we talked about this us versus them mentality. And so for some of these environments, they really want to they want to control your access to information. Some of these environments, they might tell you you can't read any other books except the books that we publish. They might not come out and say that, but they may say, well, all that other stuff out there is bad. We have the real information. Um, you can't read this, you can't read that, or even when you want to just get your own education and information, that also has been discouraged by some of these environments. It's been tough. I just started therapy. It's one of the comments I see here. Yeah, it's not an easy road at all, but I'm glad you're getting the support that you need. So that idea of not deserving the good things that come your way is it's a tough one. Some people, yes, some people want you to just be like them and not an individual. That is that's how some of these environments are. So whatever you do, if it doesn't benefit that environment in some way, then you're accused of being selfish. So it's okay if you want to, spend your free time volunteering at that place. But if you spend your free time volunteering at like maybe a homeless shelter or just relaxing in your own home, then you're a bad person and you're selfish. So that's also something you want to be aware of, is how do these environments look at your time and your resources. And a lot of times these environments, they feel entitled to those things. And they'll try to guilt you if you try to show any sort of individuality. Yeah, and the comment that says some want you to be just like them and not an individual, they will construe that being just like them as the better way of doing things. So it's again this us versus them mindset and mentality. So we talked about boundaries around our time, boundaries around finances, around the type of information that we share, right? So our privacy. What other boundaries do you think are important for you to maintain? And how do you go about deciding them? So if we think about other things, we've got the time, we have resources, we have money, we have our emotions. What else? One I touched on before was access to information and outside resources. So If you hear somebody telling you, well, you can't see these types of people. People have been told that they should never get therapy unless it's through one of their people, or you shouldn't go see a doctor, or you can't buy a house or whatever, marry this person. Social interactions, including social media. Yeah, that's a big one. Hi, Liz. That's a huge one. So many people have told me about how their social media was monitored by these types of environments, people in their environments, right? Um, so that's another thing. If you are on social media, be careful what you post, and if you're, new in a spiritual environment, you may want to wait before either following certain people or having them follow you, because that's a way that people get a lot of information and things like that. And also, I like what you said, Liz, about social interactions. I've heard stories about people being told they can't date certain individuals. Whoever they date or marry has to be handpicked by them. And of course, they may not come out and say that right away, but they might say, well, why are you dating that person? Or, you didn't ask us before you started dating that person. Or if you date someone, they have to be part of this, organization or whatnot. And and I'm not saying, there's some people that believe, okay, they want to date or marry somebody within their religion, and that's fine, but those decisions need to be made by that person. If somebody else is saying this is who you can date, who you can't date, and things like that, that is a problem. And part of what is helpful in setting these boundaries are what you communicate. So if you are new to a place like this, sharing, you may want to wait on sharing certain information. Oh, this is who I'm dating, or oh, this is what's happening. You might want to wait on that, um, and see. So there's the boundaries around those areas. Um, it's also important to think about how you want to communicate these boundaries. We don't always have to speak boundaries out loud. And what I mean by that is, you don't have to tell somebody, well, if I am going to spend this amount of money, I need to wait 24 hours. That's really not anybody's business. That's your decision to make. So I would also encourage you to be careful in what you communicate. Um, And something else along the nose, we've talked a lot about, we talked in this video about when you say no, you can just say no too. Sometimes there's pressure to explain why you're saying no. Well, I can't say, I can't do this thing because of this, or I have this coming up. And when we do that, what it's basically saying is that we have, um, like, no is not enough, right? I know it can be hard. Environments like that, and in general, value niceness and value social harmony. So you have to proceed with that the way you want to. But I would encourage you, as you are navigating these environments, to just leave your no without an explanation. Right? So, and that's a great way of setting boundaries. So, and it can be helpful too to have a phrase that you can use. Yeah, they will say, seek ye first the kingdom, as if you are not putting God first. Yeah. Yeah. And notice when they and notice how they'll equate the kingdom with like what they're doing, right? So it's manipulation, right? It's not they're we just have to read between the lines there. See another comment. If you tell everyone your business, you don't have any business. Sometimes you have to engage in polite conversations without really sharing. That's great, Vivian. Yeah, that's I think that when you can be polite without being personal. So if someone says, "Oh, we want to invite you to this thing," and you don't want to go, say, "Oh, you know what? I'm not available then. Thanks." Or maybe another time. You can be polite, but you don't have to go into reasons why you aren't going. And in fact, that's another way, manipulative people will latch onto that and tell you, well, we'll try to get you to talk you out of it. So if you say, oh, I have to study, oh, don't worry about it. It's only going to be half an hour and we can make up the studying time later, or, things like that. So it's best to just, let your no be no and not explain it. I think it's good practice too for those of us who kind of struggle with thinking on our feet in the moment to have that phrase beforehand. And so you just know exactly what you're going to say. I was told that I was being rude. This is a comment here I'm reading. I was told that I was being rude because I didn't want to answer a question. They just kept asking, then hung up and texted me that I was rude because I wouldn't answer the question. Yeah, that's textbook manipulative behavior right there. Yeah. Um, and you don't have to answer the question if you don't want to, but that's good for you for sticking to your guns and not answering that question, because manipulative people they really are banking on the fact, or banking on the hope that they can wear you down by repeated questions and things like that. um, yeah, and they'll say you're being rude or whatnot or standoffish, and it's just another manipulative technique. And so what about an adult child living at home crossing boundaries? Okay, hi. So can you just explain what you mean by that? Like when you say an adult child living at home crossing boundaries, and welcome, because I haven't seen you before. Um, so what do you mean by that? Like maybe give me an example. And who's crossing the boundaries? I'm assuming you mean the parent might be crossing a boundary. Okay, hi Micah 68. I think you're new as well. Says I tried that. I'm not available at that time. I got yelled at by my previous first lady. She acted completely unhinged. Wow. Yeah. Take note of how people react when you say no. Right? Something else that might be subtle. I don't know if you've experienced this before, but have you ever run into somebody who, like let's say you have to leave or you need to go, normal thing. Hey, you know what? Great talking to you. I have to go. Have you all ever run into people that will still keep talking? In these spiritually abusive environments, I've seen that. I've seen that before, and it just wondering, like, what's up with that. You'll see some people that will just continue to talk even though you say that you need to go or whatever, or they're not. And again, that's a subtle boundary violation, but it's important, because if you need to go, you need to go, right? But that's a way in which that person is showing that they don't value your time. So the fact that this first lady that in your comment, you said that got unhinged, that's very telling, because it shows what that, when people react a certain way to you setting up a boundary, that can also be a clue as to what they believe they're entitled to. So for Micah 68, in your case, that first lady felt entitled to your time. And so that's why they reacted that way. Um, because if they valued your time, then that wouldn't have had that type of reaction. It became a part of our relationship. She would yell and I would shut down. Oh, that sounds tough. I'm sorry. And the thing that's so tough about that is, that's an abuse of authority right there, because this is somebody who, has authority, and you're being put in a tough position because, you have to be careful how you react in these senses, because let's say you were to be unhinged like she would, then you would be accused of, oh, you're being rude and whatnot and whatever. So, I really feel for you. Okay, see another comment here. She got laid off and staying in bed, wanting here to helping clean, and feels she'd have to pay towards home and employment. Isn't bullying, intimidating, and manipulating mother age 65. Wow, that's tough. I mean, in terms of that, I can't, like always, you'll see this in the descriptions, but this is not a substitute. It's educational. So this is not therapy. So I can't say this is what you should or should do. It's not, what's the word I'm looking for? Therapeutic advice. However, in situations like this, I mean, anytime somebody is having their boundaries violated like that, then they have to figure out the best way that they can communicate those boundaries to other people and then act on that, right? And so a lot of times some of the biggest mistakes that we can make with boundaries are not having our actions follow our words. It's a lot easier to say something than to do something. And so, in situations like that where somebody is, living in someone's space, there are different things you can do. You could like maybe have a contract. Sometimes people will say they'll have a contract and then they will outline what happens when certain things don't happen. But the hardest part is enforcing that. And so when you have situations where somebody is dealing with an illness, either mental, physical, or both, they're weakened, they don't have a lot of physical or emotional energy, or they are um, just lacking in some area, then that can be really hard to enforce. And so sometimes they might need to get other people alongside them to help. But that's a good question. And as we think about boundaries and how we set boundaries, it's important that we act on those boundaries, right? Yeah, so I hear what you're saying here. It's escalating. She apologizes. It's a cycle. Thank you. So I have a video on this about apologies and how they don't mean very much. I understand that we like apologies, but apologies mean nothing unless they are followed by a change in behavior. And so these cycles, a couple of you have talked about these cycles, sort of where either someone's yelling, you're shutting down, someone's engaging in a type of, you know, harmful behavior and they apologize and it creates a cycle. And so it's important to be aware of cycles and patterns, and especially ones that come with apologies. Something that is, to me, a common factor with some of these spiritually abusive environments is that they believe that once somebody apologizes, then you have to reconcile with them. And so they're really big on pushing that apology, getting that apology, and then acting like nothing happened. And that's a dangerous place for anybody to be in. If you can listen to someone's apology, forgive them, that's fine, but you are under no, what's the word I'm looking for? No obligation to reconcile with them. You're not obligated to be in a relationship with anybody. And so when people are in these environments, when they choose healthy distance from somebody who doesn't change their behavior, they're accused of being unforgiving and judgmental and all this other stuff. And so that's also something to be aware of. You can have boundaries around how you relate to people. Oh, I like this one. I refuse to accept anything in a spiritual setting that I wouldn't accept in my personal life. Some have said that this is being judgmental, but I call it respect. Yeah, I think I like that. I like that rule, right? If you wouldn't accept it in your personal life, then why would you accept it in a spiritual environment? So people have talked about how they have been shamed from the pulpit, right? So if you wouldn't accept one of your friends or coworkers using their platform to shame and humiliate you, then don't accept that in a spiritual setting either. And thinking about boundaries around our relationships, that's also something that an easy way, I think, to show a boundary. I wouldn't say easy because it's not always easy for everybody, but one step you can take is that if someone apologizes, don't just jump right in and act like everything is normal. Because you want to take the time to see, is there changed behavior? It's not just about earning your trust, but it's maintaining it. And so beware of people that try to pressure you into reconciling with somebody or having a relationship with someone that you don't want to have a relationship with. I think in some cases, having a mentor or a mentee for a short period of time where it's like time defined and time limited and the purpose is clear and defined is good. But I've seen things in settings like this where someone's told, oh, you're now this person's mentor. Now you're this person's like accountability partner, and making it like this thing you can't get out of. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of, I think the term, maybe it was called like a covenant relationship or something. It's something about that just seemed really off to me. And people were talking about how they had been in situations where they were told like they had to be friends with this person or they had to have a relationship with someone. And so another person is dictating how you should relate to somebody else. And to me, that's unacceptable, right? Just like you wouldn't, your boss can't tell you who to spend time with in your free time, then in these environments, people shouldn't be telling you what you should, or dictating that the personal choices that you make in terms of your friendships and relationships. I see more people coming in. If you are new, this is your first time, say hi. If you have any questions or comments about this, let me know. And things that have helped you. I see people, I really like how people are talking about what has worked for them, and what is helping them along the recovery journey. I've been shunned in these ladies groups when not allowing them to get in my business. They say you lack the ability to take conviction or instruction and don't speak. I just smile and whiz by them. Yeah, yeah. If you whoever was here for a couple lives ago, we talked about the spiritual abuse bingo card. And that is one of the phrases on there is you lack ability to take instruction or conviction, right? And what that really means is you don't want to do what I'm telling you have to do. So, yeah. Hey, Kathleen, it is nice to see you. It looks like this is your first time here, so welcome. If it's your first time here, welcome. And also, if you have any questions or things you want to share, let me know. So yeah, be careful in those groups, and sometimes when we talk about behavior that's not healthy, I also want to show what can be healthy behavior, right? So in the thing that you mentioned, Shay, about being shunned in these groups, when someone reacts that way, it shows that they feel, entitled to your personal life and your personal information for whatever reason. And you don't want to give it to them, and that's okay, right? A healthy group would respect your privacy and just, ask maybe how they can help you or just ask how you're doing, right? And just respect that. Clearly, you don't want to share information. You don't have to share it. End of, right? But so I just also want to let you know rather how a healthy environment would react to that. I found myself accepting disrespect in spiritual setting because scriptures like Matthew 5:10, blessed is the man who is persecuted first for righteousness' sakes, is grossly misused. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's again the twisting and misuse of scriptures, So you're brainwashed to believe that being abused is part of the Christian faith. Yeah. And I have some posts. Well, I have, I don't think I'm not sure if I have this information out yet, but a lot of you have asked about spiritual abuse and marriage, and people have shared their stories about being in spiritually abusive marriages. And then these environments come along and they tell the person who is being abused that, well, you know what, this is for the sake of the gospel, so you should just stay in there. And that is just, the fact that an institution would encourage somebody to remain in an abusive relationship is not only is that awful, they're using their power. Like, think about how they could use their power and their influence to help protect that person who is being abused. But instead they're saying, no, you need to stay in there. And then if that person chooses to leave or set boundaries, then they're, shamed or shunned. So there's a comment. I had mentors outside of the church, and so many people ganged up and talked down to me and guilted me for valuing those people more than the ministry. I lost every single friend I had. I'm sorry about that. That's tough. But, you see that us versus them mentality, right? It's this thing where you're either for us or you're against us, instead of having this mindset that, people are free to choose who they want to be friends with. And so a healthy environment would be, would be fine with you having mentors outside the church, and would encourage you to interact with people in ways that make you feel, respected and understood and supported, instead of saying it only has to come from here. Okay, see another comment here that says, I stay away from those small groups. I have to be honest that they trigger me. I just don't attend them anymore. Yeah, and I completely, understand that decision. It's hard to, for some people, people will say, well, why don't you just go there and not share? But it's hard because you are, and someone else said that they had a very painful experience with that because you're being shunned. And so you are made to feel like an outsider or an outcast because you don't want to share on the level that other people are sharing. And it's, and I can understand your desire to want to stay away from those groups, especially if you don't feel like there's anything productive going on in those groups, right? For some people, they've talked about their experiences. They've said that they felt like it was nothing more than gossip or just a way for people to, spy on each other, or just trying to exert control over one another. It's, you have to make the decision about what works for you. And some people just talk about feeling exhausted in those groups. If everyone, I'm all for people supporting one another, but if people are sharing to this level where everyone's feeling drained, and or they're just oversharing or sharing things that are very deep that you're not ready to share a process, that can be really difficult. Control is horrible. Yeah, and people are also talking about how they felt ostracized. Someone says I want to volunteer and teach Sunday school, as well. I think that SS stands for and help seeing. They asked for volunteers, but I got so triggered. And yeah, the thought of saying yes was triggering, and that's, I can definitely understand that. And you don't have to say yes. There are, there are a few ways around that. If you could say, I'll do it. I wanted to have a 1 month trial period, and then I'll let you know, or I want to do it for a week, or just, say no. Healthy people and healthy environments will be there for you when you're ready. There's a difference between healthy environments, healthy groups of people, and people that aren't. So in a healthy group, healthy environment, they understand people have the right to come and go as they please. We don't own people, right? So if you want to leave, you can leave. And if you want to stay, you can stay. So if you decide you don't want to do this thing now, you want to do it later, a healthy environment will be there for you and support that. Controlling, abusive environments believe that you owe them, and so you can't leave without our permission, or you have to say yes to everything. They just feel entitled to. And so I definitely understand the thought of saying yes triggering. You don't have to say yes. Um, people. There's, part of, I think, what can be challenging for people as they are navigating recovery from these abusive situations is you realize I have a voice and I can use it. So I can say yes and I can say no. And sometimes with these types of environments, saying yes means saying yes to other things you didn't sign up for. So it's important to recognize where that fear is coming from. And I would suspect that in some of these environments, when you say yes, then they just feel like it's, carte blanche to run, wreak havoc in your life. So I see this in quotation marks, you can't leave until we send you. Yeah. I'm sure many of you have heard that. People have said things like, you can't leave until or if you can't just leave to leave. You have to say, I'm leaving to go to this other place, right? It's almost like saying that you can't leave a house that's on fire until you have a new house that it's built for you. That's ridiculous. If you want to leave, then you leave. And so I've heard that before, and that's always rubbed me the wrong way. I heard someone say that, you can't leave, you don't leave these places, you get called somewhere else. And so if you're not called somewhere else, then the default is to stay with us. And again, what does that show? It shows that they don't believe that you are free to leave if you want. Healthy environments get that if you want to leave, you can. If you want to stay, you can, but the choice is yours. I see another one that says yes until we release you. Yeah. So when you say release, I'm thinking of prison here. Like, release, what? I just, yeah. So again, all this spiritual terminology that people use and whatnot. It's important to be aware of that and to pay attention to that. And so it makes sense that you wouldn't want to say yes, because people don't want to get looped and entangled into something that they feel is going to limit their ability to leave. And so it's important that you think about whether you want to say yes or no. And there's some opportunities that could be great. You feel, yeah, I feel great about saying yes, and you can say yes then too. But I just always tell people, make sure you take things slowly with these types of places. There's one thing you can remember is take your time. A healthy environment won't rush you. It's the toxic and abusive ones that put a lot of pressure on you to make a decision and want to rush through things, right? So that whole thing about a war family, they want to rush through the stages of what leads to genuine intimacy to get this false sense of intimacy that we're all one family, and then all the things that come along with it, which usually end up in the person on the other end trying to be in control. So are there any other questions? This has been a great discussion. I'm getting ready to wrap up soon, but I really appreciate the comments that people have placed. People have either put in the comment section responses to other people's questions or comments. You all are very supportive of one another, and that's great. So, yeah, so I would just, oh, well, thank you. Thank you for listening, Sharita. I appreciate it. It's always great to see how you all support one another and have a lot of really insightful comments and questions. So oh, that's nice. Thank you. See another comment from Shay. We'll subscribe and hit like. Thank you. And also too, it'd be I'd recommend, if you find something helpful, you could share it and maybe see what another person might think about it, and you could have a discussion. For some people have told me that they've shared this video with someone else and it ended up having a discussion, and they were able to support one another around that topic. So but yeah, that's helpful. While you all are here, are there any topics that you would like to see covered in either a live or video? I put a post around that, and some people have responded, and that was very helpful. Yeah, I'm glad you caught the live too, Micah68. It's great to see some recurring faces and new faces. Okay. Pastors and how to discern. I like that. That's a good one. I'm actually writing that one down. So yeah, that's good. Covert abuse. I have something similar to that on coercive control. That was what the last live was on. We have, okay, so pastors and how to discern. Okay, I see a comment here. If you have a friend who can call you at any time or send you a text, but when you call them, they don't answer, or text, or they don't answer as much. Yeah, so it seems like from what you're saying, Sharita, it sounds like maybe it's like a one-sided sort of a deal going on there, where the person might, I don't know what exactly the situation that's going on, but it sounds like it's more one-sided. And that might be, it might be a time for you to set some boundaries, and you don't even have to talk about it either. You might just have to limit your availability, so that, one thing that I don't like about spiritually abusive environments or abusive people is that they encourage one-sidedness, and they make it seem like it's this virtue, right? So if you are always giving, never receiving, always, being abused or persecuted and things like that without doing anything to defend yourself, then it's like you're a good person. And so if you want to protect yourself against being harmed by others, then you're bad and selfish. And they'll misuse scripture to say things like that. And so, but what it does is it conditions people to give and give and give without any sort of compensation, right? Some of these churches, I saw that there was a documentary about, I think, one particular church where people were just like exhausted from all this volunteering and overworking themselves. So it's conditioned into people in these environments that good people give and give and give and give and don't expect anything in return, and they're basically like defenseless and want to protect themselves. So if you want to protect yourself, then you're a bad person too. um, help people who are truly in need, and I understand that, I think great, but when somebody is using and manipulating for you for your selfish gain, for their selfish gain, there's nothing that makes you a better person because you put up with that. So somebody has asked a question. I'm learning to protect my peace. Yes. As we navigate these environments, our peace is really, really important. And sometimes people say, well, how do I trust my gut, after something like that? I actually have a video on that. But part of a good indicator of that could be peace. Like, how peaceful do I feel about this? If I go along with what they're asking, is my peace going to increase or decrease? Okay, let's see what else. Proper vetting processes for spiritual leaders or environments. Okay, that's a good one too. I have a video on that. I'll put some of these. Let me see what I have in the put some of these in the comments, because I have a lot of videos in my library right down the channel, and so you can you can see some of these questions. Okay, so I have a video here about how to vet a community after spiritual abuse. So here's the link for that one, and I'll probably make a community post about this too. So here you go. I know that someone asked for this video. Oh, oops. I didn't put it. Here it is. So do you see that? Do you see the link there for that video? And then someone else asked for, let's see what else. There was another one. There's another one asking about, what was it? About trusting your gut again, or trusting other people, reopening yourself. So there actually should be like a playlist about that. So it doesn't necessarily answer the question about trusting others, but it does talk about trusting your gut again. So I have the part 1 for that, and I'm going to put that in the comments. And there, the part 2 for that, it should be on part of. So here's, okay, I'll just put it here: trusting your gut after spiritual abuse. Okay, I'll put that here. So I have the video on trusting your gut again, and then let's see what else. Okay, there's another comment here. The first lady said that God told her we would get so busy for the church that we wouldn't even have time to eat or sleep. Oh my goodness. That is, wow. So you see how that's, something that I taught, one of my videos about this, I talk about how spiritually abusive people try to get ahead of the story. And so that's a way of getting ahead of the story, right? Because imagine you're in that situation, they're working you like a dog, and then it's like, well, that's what we said was going to happen. That's what God said was going to happen. So I always say, the red flag for me is when people say God said this, right? Well, so that's also something too, when we think about our peace. I'm not saying that we shouldn't work hard, and there are going to be times where, you may work hard for an environment and maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep that particular night, but that's something that you choose to do, not because you're manipulated into that. Okay, so I have so there's pastors and how to discern. I know that there was that that suggestion. And then, okay, so someone else says here, we've been burned out in ministry and did not even get offered comp tickets to this event. Many refused to pay and did not attend. Pastor came back and said we need to give volunteers a day off. Yeah, with some of these things, you really, you need to be careful, and that's another thing to think about when you are in these environments. Look at how these environments can put on a great show for newcomers, but talk to people who have been there for a while. Maybe you go to an event, watch how the volunteers are treated, or watch how, watch what happens. Do you feel like people are being compensated well for their time? And I'm not, and there's a time and place for volunteering. I'm not saying people shouldn't volunteer, but in some of these environments, volunteering can be abused, and that's something you want to watch out for. Oh wow! Someone said I had to pretend to be sick so I could get a day off. I faked strep throat, C-19 flu, and others for the 10 passing years. I just was so tired and depressed and need to have silence and peace. Yeah, when that's your body telling you, hey, this is, I need to get some rest here. And I'm really sorry that that happened, that you had to pretend to be sick. That's another thing to think about. If you find yourself thinking, well, I've got to come up with a story, I've got to come up with an excuse to get out of something, that's a signal that maybe that's not the place for you. Because, think about a friend that you have that's a healthy person, right? Think about how comfortable you feel when you have to say no to that friend. Maybe you have to cancel plans with them, or they ask you for a favor and you just can't do it. And think about how that healthy friend reacts, right? And then think about the environment that you're in. Do they act the same way? Someone had mentioned a comment about how they wouldn't accept something in their, I think in their spiritual life, they wouldn't accept in their personal life. So that's something you can think of, is think about a healthy friend and how they would react, or a healthy family member. If you are finding yourself coming up with what you're going to say to this person and thinking about that outside your time there and having to prepare yourself emotionally, that is a signal as well. Um, let's see if there's. I might have missed if I didn't address your question or your comment, please post it again, because I might have missed it. Okay, let's see. It looks like that. Yeah, it looks like that's it. So I don't see any more questions or comments. So it looks like I got to everybody's, and these are some great ideas too for 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 videos, especially when it seems like a lot of you are wanting to understand how to, the signs to look for that a place is healthy, or how to vet properly. And that's important. And we want to make sure that even as you're doing these things, be kind to yourself. It's easy to, judge yourself for past mistakes and uh, wallow in regret. I'm not saying it's the easiest thing not to do, but it's also important to understand the growth that you've had, where you were before versus where you are now, the things that you've learned now that you didn't know before, so that you can look at that yourself from a place of understanding and compassion instead of judgment. I think that's really important, because you don't want to do the work of the spiritually abusive environment. They've beaten you up enough, so you don't want to continue that. You want to continue their work. If you leave that environment, it's hard to leave mentally, but one thing you can do is just try and commit to not repeating their actions. So it's repeating their actions or repeating their voices. Um, so yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for your time and your comments and everything. It was great. So I hope I will see you all in the next one. Oh, hi. How are you? I see you here. I see you back. Rare breed. So the church wants you to come back. You haven't been back. Yeah. They that's not uncommon. These places will, they might even ask other people to check on your whereabouts. They might demand you come back or say whatever. But remember, you are the one in control of your body, your autonomy, your decisions. So, excuse me, if you don't want to go back, you don't have to. All right, everybody. So I will see you. I guess the next time I do a live, I'll try to post. I always post in the community section when I'm on live. So in case, and if for some of you say, "Oh, I missed the live," make sure you have your notification bell on as well. That should notify you when I am going on live. Yes. Have a great evening, everyone. All right. I hope you have a peaceful evening. Take care. Bye-bye.